Hare Krishna. I'm first of all offering my Dandavat pranams unto the lotus feet of my most beloved Gurudev, Nitya Leela Pravishta Om Asto Tarasarashi Shiman Shila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And the same again, millions and millions of times, unto the lotus feet of our most beloved Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, and all the Vaishnava and Vaishnavi devotees of the Lord. My Dandavat pranams to you all. So today is the third day of Kartik, and it's the second day of our Parikrama. The first day was the Purnima, when we glorified Param Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj. And then yesterday we went to Kaliyadaha Sanatan Goswami's Madan Mohan, Advaitavat, the Asta Sakhi Mandir, and Prabodhananda Saraswati. So we walked from Gopinath Bhavan. But today is the first day of our bus day. So Srila Gurudev arranged for us to see all the pastime places by bus, which makes all of the places very accessible. Originally, Srila Gurudev would walk around Braj with a tractor and trailer for their luggage. And if you ever get a chance to speak to Uma Didi, she can describe those very early days of just bouncing around in a tractor and trailer through the fields of Braj. So this was how they had done it previously. And then in the early 90s, we began to do the buses. And at that time there would be 7 buses for the Bengali devotees. They would all come across from Navadvip, from Bengal. And there would be half a bus for the Western devotees. That's how many devotees there were. So it was a very small party. So, yes, we're all climbing aboard our buses today. We've all checked our seats on the notice board, and we're searching in the near dawn light where all the buses are parked. And we have to find our number buses, and it's a little frantic. But everyone kind of somehow or other tumbles into the buses, and we set sail for today, Madhuvana, which is about 12, 13, maybe 14 kilometers from the gate of Gopinath Bhavan. And before we reach this remarkably beautiful forest of Madhuvana, we generally stop for breakfast in a function type place in Mathura, and there's Mathura families, and they feed us very nicely, khichdi, etc., and dahi and halwa. And then we come out of that facility and again hunt for our buses, which is always a drama. So all these little things are part of our Parikrama experience that we navigate through to help us be inspired to become patient with the environment and to become tolerant of various difficulties we may undergo or experience during this month. But if we keep our focus on the purpose of serving Srimati Radharani, who is the Ishtadeva of this month, and getting Srila Gurudev's mercy, then everything is comfortably reconciled in the consciousness and we become peaceful. So then we board our buses from Mathura and we go to Talavana, which is about 2.5 miles, Madhuvana which is about 2.5 miles from Mathura. It's straight south. Mathura, I described a couple of times already, the different forests and so on. From Vrindavan, it's south. So we travel south towards Agra. That's the main road, is going that direction. And then we go past Mathura and we veer off to the left, which is west. And we head in the direction of Giriraj Govardhan. And then we come to the most beautiful little village with a huge, huge kund. And this is Madhuvana. This kund is about 5 or 6 times as big as Radha Kund. If we're familiar with the size of Radha Kund, it's probably, I don't know how many football pitches big, but it's a big, beautiful, clear kund, and especially as we described this season, after the rainy season, the waters are very clear, and it's very nice for bathing in and so on. So we come to this beautiful kund. It's called Krishna Kund, and it's in the forest of Madhuvana. So this forest of Madhuvana has an ancient history that goes right back to Satyayuga. In Satyayuga, there was a ferocious demon living here called Madhu. And Krishna, he came and he killed, not Krishna, Bhagavan at that time. Krishna hadn't appeared. This was in Satyayuga. So Bhagavan appeared and killed that demon. And hence the area became called Madhuvan because of that. And also Krishna, he was called Madhusudan because of the killing of that demon. So this Madhuvan is there today. Also, it's described that Madhuvan comes from the name of Madhava. Madhava means springtime, or the beloved of Sri Radha. This Dava means the beloved of Radha. So various origins of the name of Madhuvan. But we are also, Madhu means honey, sweetness, filled with the sweetness of Krishna's pastimes during Dwapara Yuga. So in Satyayuga, the Madhu demon was slain by Bhagavan. And then in Treta Yuga, there's the beautiful pastime. There was another demon by the name of Madhu. And he performed austerities to Shivji, Sankarji, and he was given a trident, a mystical trident. And with that trident, no deva, no human, no animal could hurt him. He was completely protected, like an invincible weapon. And therefore, no one could curb his pride, because he had taken bad association. Originally he was from the Suryavams dynasty, but he'd taken bad association and his mind had become polluted with demonic ideas of exploiting the material energy. So his father rejected him. And when this Madhu demon was leaving his body, he bestowed his weapon to his son, who was Lavanasura. And Lavanasura was even more cruel-hearted than his father, and would harass the residents of that area, Madhuvan, to such a degree where the rishis and sages, they went to Ayodhya to appeal to Lord Ram to please protect them from this ferocious demon who was harassing them to such an uncomfortable degree. So then Lord Ram in Ayodhya, he requested his brother Satrughna that he please go to Mahavan and quell this demon, finish this demon. So Satrughna was very happy to hear that order, but he requested before he left Ayodhya, "Oh, you please let me take this Adivaraha deity." We spoke on the first day of when we were talking about Mathura, about the different Varaha Devs in Mathura. There's Sweta Varaha and Adivaraha. So this Adivaraha, the history is very beautiful. It was originally manifested to one Brahman who was worshipping that deity during Satyayuga, and Indra became enamored with the beauty of that deity and requested the Brahman to come to Swagaloka, and they would continue with most opulent worship of that deity. So that Brahmana agreed, and the deity was transferred by Indra to Swagaloka, where the deity was beautifully, opulently worshipped. And then when Ravana invaded Swagaloka, he captured that most attractive deity and he brought it back to Lanka, and there he was worshipping that deity in Lanka. And then when Ram captured Lanka later on in the pastimes of Ram, then he also found this very, very beautiful deity and took it with him back to Ayodhya. So this is the history of this deity that Satrughna brought with him to Madhuvana at that time. And then when he arrived in Madhuvan, he'd also gone to the ashram of Valmiki to get his blessings before he came. And then he came to Madhuvan, and he knew, of course, about the mystical trident. So he positioned himself when Lavanasura had gone out hunting for his meals, killing the animals. Then Satrughna situated himself in front of Lavanasura's cave and waited for his return. And the trident was in the cave. Lavanasura hadn't taken the trident when he just went generally hunting. So when Lavanasura returned, carrying elephants and boars and so on, deer, from his hunting, then Satrughna challenged him to battle. And there was a ferocious battle, but Lavanasura was desperately trying to reach his cave to retrieve his mystical trident so he could vanquish Satrughna. But Satrughna's expertise was so good that he completely defeated Lavanasura and eventually severed his head from his body, much to the great satisfaction of all the rishis and sages there. So then Satrughna, he established this beautiful deity of Varaha in Mathura, the Mathura that is there today. Mathura itself borders on the forest of Madhuvan. Even though Mathura is in another dimension, a part of Mathura overlaps into this forest. That's the borderline of the forest. And then he established Adivaraha there at that time. And Satrughna became the king of Madhuvan province, or that area of Madhuvan at that time. So this was the history in Treta Yuga. And the residents were all totally grateful, etc., to Satrughna for bringing them again to a civilized, peaceful condition. And then in Dwapara Yuga, Krishna would come many, many times to this beautiful kund. When we arrive at this kund, immediately the devotees are going to be influenced by the beauty and the scenic attractiveness of the area. It's filled with beautiful green trees, and the lake is always glitteringly beautiful. And there's a very practically mystical appearance about this scene at Madhuvan. It's extremely beautiful, especially as we see it in the early morning. About 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning is when we usually reach there. And then we hear about these beautiful pastimes. So Krishna would come many times during Dwapara Yuga with all his cows, hundreds and thousands of cows, and all the sakas. And they would drink the water from this kund and bathe and perform all kinds of beautiful pastimes with the sakas. And sometimes, or practically always, the gopis would be peeping through the bushes. They would actually be there, and Krishna would be sending them sidelong glances while he was even with the sakas. So there's many beautiful pastimes of Krishna here with the cows. Just going back a minute to the Treta Yuga, there's a very beautiful deity of Satrughna that has been installed by the people there, that the devotees go up and can take darshan of. It's Satrughna and Lord Narayan. He's also there. So then in Kali Yuga, so that's Satya Yuga, was the Madhu demon. Treta Yuga is Satrughna, and Dwapara Yuga is Krishna and his cows and cowherd boys and beautiful childhood pastimes there. And in Kali Yuga, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he also is recorded to have come to this place and relished the sweetness and beauty and the inspiration to remember Radha and Krishna's pastimes at this place. And at that time, it's described that he saw a spurti of Krishna's pastimes and went into complete ecstasy. So this has been recorded by the scholars and described. He had this very beautiful spurti of Radha and Krishna. Also here, there's a as we look at the Kund directly, to our right, up a little track, we will see the temple of Satrughna. And to our left, there's a very small temple, and it contains a very beautiful deity of Shyam Dauji, Black Balaram. Balaram was very unhappy that his younger brother wouldn't come back to nourish the Brijbasis after he left. So he decided to come back himself. And when he came back, he was able to, for a short period, quell the enormous separation that the Brijbasis were feeling from Krishna. And he was associating with all the Brijbasis and the Sakas and the Gopis in particular. And at that time, his heart melted in empathy to the other Brijbasis in their separation mood from Krishna. So he was thinking deeply, deeply about his dear brother Krishna. And at that time, his whole body became shyam, became blackish, just like Krishna, as he was thinking. So he was relishing this shyam ras, or it's called madhurya ras. And he took on this shyam complexion. This shyam ras is the only honey that is truly sweet, and it's eternally relished by Baladev. So Baladev is the first manifestation from Swarup Shakti, and as a bhakta to bring pleasure to Radha and Krishna. This is his principle. He's the Akhand Guru Mula Tattva of he's leading us to how to perform seva to Sri Radha and Krishna. So this very beautiful deity is there for us to have darshan of in Madhuvana. So these are the pastimes in Madhuvana or at Krishna Kund, because also in Madhuvana is the place of Dhruva's pastimes, the place where Dhruva petitioned Lord Narayan for a benediction that he would have a kingdom greater than his grandfather. So we walk from Krishna Kund. It's approximately about half a kilometer, maybe 3/4 of a kilometer. We walk through the fields, we climb over a little stone wall, and we come to this very attractive temple that has been built in glorification and remembrance of Dhruva Maharaj. And it's quite steep, it's on a bit of a hill. We climb up there, and now this particular temple has been renovated greatly over the last years, and they've got a nice marble floor, and the deities are very beautiful. But there is the deity of Lord Narayan, and there's a deity of Dhruva Maharaj. So this pastime is very beautiful for the devotees to reflect upon, especially at this time during our Kartik Brat, to appreciate the determination of this little boy, Dhruva, in fulfilling his heartmost desire. The name Dhruva, Dhru, means determined. This is what his name means. So the pastime is very beautiful to reflect upon, that this young boy Dhruva, his mother is Suniti, and his stepmother is Suruchi, and his father is Uttanapad. Uttanapad is the brother of Priyavrata. They are both the sons of Swayambhuva Manu, who was the first Manu in this day of Lord Brahma. There are 14 Manus, and the first Manu is Swayambhuva Manu. So he had these two sons. So Uttanapad was serving his father. Priyavrata at that time was embracing a mood of brahmachari under the guidance of Narad, and he takes the reins of the control later on after Uttanapad. So Uttanapad, he had two wives, Sunita and Suruchi, and he had a son by each of the wives. Suniti had Dhruva, and Suruchi had Uttam. So one day, his mother, Suniti, dressed Dhruva up very nicely to go and take darshan of his kingly father. And when he came into the throne room, he wanted to sit on the lap of his father, as Uttam was. Uttam was sitting on one lap of his father, and his father indicated that Dhruva could also come and sit on his other lap. But Dhruva's stepmother, Suruchi, Suruchi means material taste. Su means extreme, and Ruchi means taste. So Suruchi was able to enamor Uttanapad to a degree where she could control him, whereas Suniti was far more devotionally inclined and would follow the rules and regulations, etc., in a devotional mood, but this wasn't sufficient to control Uttanapad, so Suruchi was controlling Uttanapad. So Dhruva, on the indication of his father, went to climb on his other lap, but his stepmother, Suruchi, she immediately forbade him, and she said, "No, only when you take birth from my womb will you have the eligibility to sit on your father's lap." And when Dhruva heard this, he was stung to the core in complete anger and resentment towards his stepmother, that he should be deprived of his father's embrace on his lap. And we remember that Dhruva is coming in a very powerful Kshatriya line. So this Kshatriya mood of hurt went very, very deep in the heart of Dhruva, and he ran to his mother immediately, completely, practically inconsolable. And his mother, she was also, of course, overcome by unhappiness that this event had taken place, but she counseled Dhruva to contain his anger, and Dhruva demanded to his mother, how can I get a kingdom that is even greater than my father's, that is even greater than my grandfather, who is Swayambhuva Manu. And his mother at that time, as we said before, she was a great devotee of the Lord. She meditated and she said, only by serving nicely the Supreme Personality of Godhead can your desire ever be fulfilled. So then Dhruva, just a little boy, 5 years old, said to his mother, well, where is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan? I'll go and see him. I want to speak to him. And his mother said, well, you have to meditate on him. He's in your heart. You have to meditate on that personality. And then he will, through the performance of your meditation, then he will manifest to you, and then you can make your request like this. So Dhruva, in this very determined mood, he immediately left the palace and decided, because he understood that he had to meditate now, he decided that he would go to the forest and he would meditate so that he could have his desire fulfilled. Dhruva is described as being a sakam karma bhakta. Sakam means he worshipped the Lord because he had a desire for the fruit of his worship. Sakam, as opposed to nishkam. The prefix nish means without. So if you perform nishkam bhakti, then that is bhakti without any desire for any fruit. If you perform sakam bhakti, that means you want the fruit of your activity. So Dhruva is described as the sakam bhakta in the 5 levels of bhakti that we described, I think, on the first day. There's the Jnani Bhakti Prahlad, then Bhakta Prahlad, and then there's the Shuddha Bhakta Ambarish, then there's the Para Bhakta Hanuman, the Prem Para Bhakta, the Pandavas, and then there's the Prematur Bhakta, who is Uddhava. So Dhruva, he comes on the bottom of that. He's like the 6th description of the Sakam Bhakta. But he was determinedly walking towards the forest. And at that time, Narad, he became aware of the determination of this young boy with astonishment. And he came in front of that young boy trying to deter him from leaving the palace and going to the forest. But then when he saw the determination within Dhruva, then he benedicted him with this mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. He told Dhruva that if you take this mantra and you perform austerities within the forest of Madhuvana, where we are today. This forest of Madhuvana, of course, is in Braj, so it contains all the potencies to fulfill these types of desires, like Ambarish Maharaj was performing his Ekadasi Brat, also in Madhuvana. So, and then he blessed Dhruva Maharaj that after 6 months of practicing this mantra and performing austerities, then for sure you must have darshan of the Lord. So when Narad makes a benediction of this nature, the Lord hears and acknowledges that. So the Lord also was aware of this situation. So then Dhruva, just a little boy, 5 years old, marched into the forest of Madhuvana. Huge trees, snakes, wild animals, everything was there, but he was fearless in his determination. And then it's described that for the first month of his time in the forest, he only ate fruits and berries every 3rd day. He was performing austerity. This is in Satya Yuga. This pastime is being performed in Satya Yuga, where the Yuga Dharma was austerity, to reveal the Lord in the heart, Paramatma. This was the Yuga Dharma in Satya Yuga. So his first month, he ate fruits and berries every 3rd day. And the 2nd month, he just ate dry grass and leaves every 6 days. And the 3rd month, he drank water only every 9 days would he take water. And in the 4th month, he held the air within his body for 12 days at a time before exhaling and taking another breath. So we can see these progressively more severe austerities that Dhruva, in his passion of desire to gain a kingdom that was not only greater than his father, not only greater than his grandfather, but even greater than, in fact, Lord Brahma. He wanted a kingdom greater than Lord Brahma also. So in the 5th month, it's described that he was standing on one leg and he was not breathing at all, and he'd locked the airs within his body to such an extent that the whole universe was being affected by his tapasya, because his austerity was so extreme that the whole universe was feeling the pressure of Dhruva's austerities, and practically they couldn't breathe. So they were petitioning the Lord to please. First of all, they petitioned Lord Brahma, and then he explained to them what was actually happening, that Dhruva was performing these remarkable austerities. And then Lord Brahma, he requested Lord Vishnu to please go and give your darshan to this devotee of yours who was performing these austerities. So Dhruva, he had been chanting this mantra, and Narad had described to him how to meditate on the Lord, how to remember his beautiful lotus eyes, his beautiful curling hair, his conch, his chakra, his padma, and his club. And he had been meditating on the Lord in his heart, and all of a sudden his meditation broke, and he couldn't see the Lord in his heart anymore. So he opened his eyes, and to his wonderful astonishment, he saw the Lord was descending on the back of Garuda and coming directly in person to see him, to give him darshan. And at this time it's described that when Dhruva saw the magnificent beauty and sweetness of the Lord, all his material desires vanished. And it's described it was as if he was looking for broken glass, but instead he'd found a diamond. And Lord Narayan came on his carrier Garuda and stood in front of Dhruva, and Dhruva was trying to offer prayers but he was only a child. He hadn't been taught so many prayers and so on. So Bhagavan Narayana at that time, he touched his conch shell to his head so that all the potency and remembrance of these prayers and mantras would come in the heart and consciousness of Dhruva. Then he was able to chant beautiful prayers in glorification of the Lord. And then the Lord requested him to ask for a benediction. At that time, Dhruva didn't want anything anymore, because of course all his desires had been taken away by perceiving the beauty of the Lord. But the Lord still benedicted him with a kingdom that was greater than his grandfather's, greater than Swayambhuva Manu, in the form of the pole star. We see the pole star is existing even after the annihilation of each pralaya, or each pralaya. At the end of each of Lord Brahma's days, there's a pralaya where the planetary systems become inundated by water right up to the higher planets of Mahaloka and Tapaloka. All the lower planets are completely inundated. So at that time, the pole star is still shining brightly in the celestial heavens. So he was given the kingship of that pole star. This was the benediction from Lord Narayan. So that means he had a kingdom greater than his father and greater than his grandfather, in fact, because his grandfather, Swayambhuva Manu, would only have the duration of 71 cycles of Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali. This is the cycle of one Manu. So each Manu lives for that amount of time, which is an incredibly long time, which is millions of years. But now Dhruva had a kingdom that was greater than Swayambhuva Manu. So he had his material desires fulfilled, but more than that, he had his devotional inspiration ignited by perceiving the beauty and sweetness of the Lord. And then the Lord disappeared from his view. And then Dhruva, he decided again he would go back to the palace of his father. Meanwhile, when he left, of course, Uttanapad was so distraught that his son had left. He knew exactly why his son had left, because of the insult from Suruchi. And he went searching with all his army and so on out in the countryside, looking for his son. But then he met Narad, and Narad told him the situation. He said, Dhruva will come back after 6 months. So then Uttanapad was pacified and returned to his kingdom. So after 6 months, he was anxiously waiting for any sign of his dear son to return. And as soon as Dhruva was sighted returning from the forest of Madhuvana, immediately the king came out with all his retinue to welcome him with heartfelt emotion. And at that time also, Suruchi, she was the first one to embrace Dhruva. She felt great remorse at her behavior, in fact, because she'd understood what had happened. And it's described in Srimad Bhagavatam that she was the first one to actually embrace him. And then Suruchi. And then Sunita, she came, and her happiness was so extensive, of course. And milk was flowing from her breasts and everything. And she embraced her son. Dhruva at that time was a complete hero, because if you've had darshan of Bhagavan and you've lost your material attachments, then the whole world becomes utterly attracted to that personality. So all Uttanapad and all his citizens were fully aware of the greatness that Dhruva had accomplished through his meditation in the forest, and they were aware of his devotional sentiments then. So then Dhruva was taken into the palace and, made so much, everyone was so much favorable towards him. And then a short time later, his brother, Uttam, he was killed by the Yakshas. And at that time, just before he was killed, his father, Uttanapad, he had gone to the forest, and he had left the kingship with Uttam, who was actually the older brother, but the older brother was killed by the yakshas. So Dhruva, in his with his Kshatriya spirit, he went out and he met with the yakshas, and he began to destroy them indiscriminately. He was destroying so many hundreds of thousands of yakshas to such a degree where his grandfather Swayambhuva Manu came and requested him, please stop this useless slaughter. You've lost one brother, but you're killing millions and millions of yakshas. So on the request of his grandfather Swayambhuva Manu, and Narad also came at that time and was requesting him to stop, and Kuvera, who is in charge of the yakshas, was Kuvera, who of course is a friend of dear Lord Shiva. So it was understanding that Lord Shiva would also be offended by this useless slaughter. So then Dhruva, he desists from any more slaughter of those yakshas, and then he rules his father's kingdom for 36,000 years. So at the end of his rule, he goes to Badrikashram, and there is described in the Bhagavatam that with his senses purified, he withdrew his senses within to his body, and he was meditating on the Archa Vigraha form of the Lord, and his heart was melting, and tears were flowing from his eyes. These moods of bhav were present in him. And then it's described that he was liberated from material bondage. And at that time, a magnificent celestial airplane arrived, which was described as big as a house. And two associates, Nanda and Sunanda, from Vaikuntha, with 4 arms, looking the same as Lord Narayan. They arrived and they instructed Dhruva that now he'd become qualified to mount this airplane and come to the planet of Vishnu, the Vishnu Loka. He was invited, and it was saying this is very rare for someone to attain this destination. But Dhruva, because of his intense austerities in the forest of Madhuvana, had achieved this by melting the heart of Vishnu. So Vishnu had sent this plane to take him back to Vishnu Loka. And just as he was about to climb into the plane, it's described that death personified came in front of him, and he took that opportunity to stand on the head of death, and then used him like a doorstep to climb into the plane. And when he was in the plane, he began to think about his mother. And the two associates in the plane, Nanda and Sunanda, they indicated, they could understand his heart, they indicated just to the side that his mother was already going in another plane. So his destination was Vishnu Loka, the planet where Lord Vishnu resides. And this is described how the sun and the moon and all the planetary systems, they all revolve around this planet, this eternal planet. This is a part of the Vaikunthas, so this is an eternal realm. So Dhruva achieved this realm, which was most extraordinary for someone to achieve, a greater destination than his grandfather or his father, certainly, that kingdom. So all his material desires were fully fulfilled, and he got the great gift of devotional service to sprout within his heart, and his attraction to Lord Krishna flourished completely to such a degree where he became liberated from his material body and achieved that highest destination of Vishnu Loka. So this is the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj. So Dhruva Maharaj ki jai and Madhuvana ki jai. So now we're going to avail our buses again, and we're going to go to the very beautiful forest of Talavana. Hare Krishna. So now we've availed our buses, and we're driving through the beautiful landscape of Vrindavan, through very small country roads to come to the forest which is very close by of Talavana. This is the second forest in a line. There's Madhuvana, Talavana, then Bahulavana, and Kumudvana is just off to the side. So there's a line of forests here that we are going to eventually travel through. So this forest of Talavana is where we've come, and we park our buses and we walk through a very nice roadway through the countryside of Braj, seeing all the joyful residents chanting alongside of us and all smiling and so on, very welcoming the residents here. And then we reach, just before we reach the actual temple, celebrating this pastime of Krishna defeating Dhenukasura, because this is the pastime that takes place here. Just before we reach that temple, Gurudev would instruct us to look across to the west, and across to the west, to the south, we can actually have darshan of Kumudvana. Kumudvana is one of the principal forests of Braj, but it's not so accessible by road, so we wouldn't go there directly, but we'd have darshan of Kumudvana from just before we reach the temple of Talavana. We can see across, there's a lake, and then across in the distance we can see the large trees of Kumudvana forest. So then we come into the beautiful temple at Talavana, celebrating the great victory of Krishna over Dhenukasura. So this pastime is that Krishna was with his cowherd friends, and he was near Bahulavana. They weren't in Talavana. And he was challenged by his friends to kill this demon of hunger that the Sakas were feeling. They were feeling some hunger that day. Of course, this is the arrangement of Yogamaya to inspire Krishna to actually come to this forest. And when they were challenging Krishna to kill this demon of hunger, they were requesting Krishna, can't you smell these beautiful tal fruits that are coming through from this tal forest, which is just a couple of kilometers away? The air was fragrant with the beautiful scent of these beautiful juicy fruits, and it was exciting their appetite. So this forest of Talavana, where these tal fruits were grown, was under the proprietorship of Kamsa, of course. It was Kamsa's forest, and he'd instructed all the local residents, don't any of you ever go into this forest. And I'm sending my strong demon guards, particularly Dhenukasura. Dhenukasura is the donkey demon, to guard against any trespassers into my orchard. So then Krishna became very joyful at the thought of purifying this forest and this area of this demon. So he and Balaram together, they marched at the head of all their Sakas, and they marched into the forest, into this forest of Talavana very boldly. And all the tal fruit is it looks like a palm tree, and the tal fruits are just below the leaves, like the coconuts hang just below the leaves of a palm tree, high up in the air. So when Krishna and Balaram strode into this forest, which no other citizen had dared to go in, because this demon Dhenukasura, he was known to eat men. He was that much of a ferocious ass demon. He would eat men. So Krishna and Balaram, they strode into the forest, and Balaram and Krishna immediately began shaking these trees vigorously. So all the fruits would drop down, and the Sakas were gleefully picking them all up and tasting them at that time. But then, of course, by the noise of all these dropping fruits, Dhenukasura understood that there was some trespasser in his forest, and he went charging there with his follower demons in the form of asses also, to challenge whoever that trespasser was. And then he saw the beauty of Krishna and Balaram and the Sakas, but his beauty was immediately, his vision was immediately covered over by the deep lust and envy within his heart, covered that vision of the beauty and speciality of Krishna, to such a degree where he ran at Balaram. And he ran first at Balaram because he thought that Balaram was the bigger of the two. And he swung his hind legs around and he tried to crash his razor-sharp hoofs into the chest of Baladev. And Baladev just deflected him away with one single push. And then again, that demon started roaring and he came racing towards Balaram again, and again he swung his hind legs around and went to kick Balaram. But at that time, Balaram, he grabbed one of his hind legs and he began to swirl him around and around and around in the air until the centrifugal force of that swirling made Dhanuka lose his life. And then he threw the body of that ass demon high into the tall trees. And then the tree crashed against another tree and another tree and another tree. And then all the other ass demons, seeing their master Dhanuka killed in such a contemptuous way by Balaram, immediately raced towards Krishna and Balaram and were trying to kick them also with their hooves. But Krishna and Balaram at that time, they began a joyful pastime, much to the happiness of all the audience of the Sakhas, of swinging all these demons around and throwing them into the trees, where they were all crashing down like a domino effect. And eventually, practically the whole forest of all these trees was knocked down, and the demons were just there with blood all over them, where they had fallen, killed by Krishna and Balaram through swirling them around like this. And at that time, the Sakhas, they had kind of lost their appetite when they saw all the fruits covered in blood and so on. They were much purer than that, and they didn't want to eat these contaminated fruits at that time. And it's described that the local tribesmen, the Pulindas, they came and they gathered those fruits later. So this demon, of course, Dhenukasura, represents ignorance, that only Baladev can actually purify. Baladev, as we said just previously, is Akhanda Guru Mula Tattva. That Guru will purify our ignorance. We are all in ignorance. This is why we are in the material world. We need to have knowledge to purify this ignorance so we can understand who is Krishna, who am I, and what is the nature of the spiritual world, and what is the relationship between myself and Krishna and the material world. So this Sambandha Gyan, this ignorance, needs to be purified by Baladev Prabhu. And there's a very beautiful verse that we chant when we come to this place. Maya Mugdasya Jivasya Neo Narta Chaturvidha Rit Durbalyam Chaparado Satrishna Tattva Vibrama. And this is describing these four principal anartas, or unwanted, useless things that we are holding on to. Artha means wealth, and anartha means something that has no wealth. So we are holding on to these four anarthas, which is binding us in ignorance because of these four anarthas. So the first of those anarthas is Hriday Dubalyam. The heart is overwhelmed by ignorance, and this is described by attachment to worthless objects not related to Krishna, hypocrisy and deceit, kutinata, envy on seeing another's property, and of course the greatest anartha, which is pratishta, seeking one's own glory rather than glorifying Krishna. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he has described this last anartha of pratishta as being the greatest tree in the forest of trees of anarthas. This pratishta is very, very difficult to overcome, and we have to work diligently to overcome our own agenda, so to speak, of putting ourselves forward rather than having the experience of just directly worshipping and serving Krishna, and not having to cope with the false ego that is always thinking it's being loved when it gets special attention. But actually the false ego is strengthened when so much attention is lavished on it. So the devotees must be very cautious, particularly for this particular aspect, because in each anartha there's 4 principal anarthas. Hridaya Dubalyam is the first, and then there's aparad, then there's asat trishna, then there's tattva brahm. So in each of these principal anarthas there's 4 subheadings which are describing in more detail about that useless baggage that we are carrying, that anartha. So we must be very aware of this hridaya dubalyam, this weakness of heart. And then the second principal anartha is aparad. And there's aparad, apa means without, and ratha means Sri Ratha. So when we commit offenses, and the difference between an offense and a sin is pertaining to the gross body. If we murder somebody, then we get put in jail. The gross body will suffer. But if we are offenses to the devotees, our subtle desires will be polluted, and our material desires will be inflamed, and we will become far more separated from Krishna. So offenses are much worse than sins, because they can only be purified by diligent spiritual surrender to Guru and very careful behavior amongst the Vaishnavas. So in these 4 types of offenses there is Nam Aparad, Seva Aparad, Dham Aparad, and Aparad to other minute entities. So this general mood of offenses. The reason why I'm saying these is because this is how we clear the ignorance that Baladev was able to demonstrate by killing Dhenukasura. Dhenukasura is the embodiment of ignorance. So he killed that demon. So how can we ourselves follow the example of Baladev and get this demon of these anarthas out of our hearts? When we have the roadmap, so to speak, when we understand what are the anarthas, what are the minefields that we have to avoid, then half the task is done. Once we can sight the enemy, so to speak, then we just have to work on defeating the enemy of these anarthas. So hridaya dubalyam and aparad. And then the third is asat trishna. This is the thirst for material gains, the desire for objects of this world, desire for swaga, desire for mystic powers, and desire for liberation. Everything is motivated by our desire. Asat trishna, this thirst. So we want to purify this ignorance and become enthusiastic and eager to please Sri Guru and to please the Vaishnavas and to serve, in this month particularly, the holy Dham by our remembrances of these pastimes. And then the 4th aparad is tattva brahm. This is illusion about one's real identity. And there's 4 subheadings to this. The first is swarup brahm, that the jiva has forgotten his real identity as a servant of Krishna. Then the second is paratattva brahm. He's confused about who is the Absolute. Is it Shiva? Is it Brahma? Is it Vishnu? Not clear on Siddhanta. And then the third is sadhya sadhan brahm. What is the sadhya? Is it jnana? Is it karma? Or is it bhakti? Which sadhana? And prem is also of 2 types. Prem is of Aishwarya and Madhurya. Where should my focus be? The jiva, bewildered by the material energy, needs to have clarity on these subject matters. This is the purification of his ignorance to go forward. When we have complete clarity by the mercy of Guru, who is ultimately none other than Sri Baladev Prabhu, the potency of Sri Baladev Prabhu, then how can we purify our existence to realize the absolute reality of ourselves as being maidservants of Srimati Radharani? And then the final subheading of Tattva Brahm is Bhajan Virodha Vishaya Brahm. These are like having Mayavad conceptions or impersonal conceptions. So these 4 principal anarthas and their 4 subheadings have been very much gifted to us by the sages of the past, particularly Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, talks much about this, and it's also described in Bhajan Rahasya by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So if the devotee is sincere about wanting to be purified of his ignorance so that he can see clearly the divine truths of his purpose in life, then we need to work on these anarthas with the mercy of Guru and the Vaishnavas to purify. Our goal is not ultimately anartha nivritti, to purify the anarthas. This is not to be our principal meditation. Our principal meditation is to see the artha, see the wealth, artha pravritti. We want to look to the wealth of our devotion towards Radha and Krishna. This we want to have as the focus of our meditation and concentration. Where is my devotion? Because by devotion, then all these anarthas are just swept away like a wind will just blow the leaves off a tree very, very easily. Just as the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj. As soon as he had darshan of Lord Narayan, immediately all these material desires just vanished from his heart. So this is the desire of the devotee, that he will have darshan of the Supreme Lord in Braj. He will hear sufficiently about Krishna to increase his meditative mood on that divine personality to such a degree where all of these inebrities of the material consciousness just get forgotten completely. Srila Gurudev used to say many times that how can you get the air out of a pot? The air represents all our mental, material, anarthas, etc. How do you get this out of a pot? You get the air out of a pot by putting something else into it. If you put liquid into that pot, then automatically the air goes out. So we want the liquid ras, the liquid juice of these divine pastimes in Braj to empty us of all these anarthas. This is the path. The path is not like a yogi to sit somewhere and try to purify yourself by yourself like the mystic yogis do. That's not the path of bhakti. The path of bhakti is devotion, to try and be inspired with devotional moods and sentiments towards the Vaishnavas, towards Thakurji, towards Guru, towards the Dham, towards our Harinam, our practice, etc. So we want to increase this positive focus. It's not the negative focus. Once Gurudev was asked, should we meditate on our anarthas while we chant? And Gurudev became very vigorous and said, never. If you meditate on your anarthas, more will come. Just like if you meditate on ghosts, you'll attract ghosts. So this is not the path of the Vaishnava. The path of the Vaishnava is to hear and sing the glory and sweetness of Krishna and Radha's pastimes, and have that flood the heart and empty it of all these negative anarthas. So today we're very grateful to have gone to Madhuvana and heard about the different pastimes in Madhuvana through the different yugas and ages, and to Dhruva Tila, which is also in Madhuvana, and then to have had darshan of Kumudvana, which is a beautiful forest where many of Krishna's pastimes took place with the cowherd boys, etc. And this forest of Talavana, where this beautiful pastime, where Baladev annihilates this Dhenukasura, who is the embodiment of ignorance. So we understand, what is my ignorance? My ignorance is contained within these anarthas. So at least when I hear about the anarthas and I know what they are, perhaps I can begin to make some inroads in purifying them. But the principle is to hear the sweetness and glories of Sri Radha and Krishna's pastimes. So now we're going to again avail our buses and return to Gopinath Bhavan, where they'll have a wonderful lunch prasadam all ready for us. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Shri Madhuvan Dham ki jai, Shri Dhruva Tila ki jai, Talavana ki jai, Kumudvana ki jai, VRAJA-MANDAL PARIKRAMA 2018 ki jai, Srila Gurudev ki jai, Vaishnavas ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol, Vancha Kalpaturubhyascha, Kripa Sindhavyevacha, Patitanam Padnibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaha.